welcome to Live the African Dream podcast. I'm your host, and today we have Ben Lyon. He is the founder of Stax and a partner at DFS Labs, where he provides deal flow and portfolio support to numerous companies. Stax is a simple and secure way to transfer money, buy airtime, and pay bills in Africa without dialing USSD codes or relying to an internet connection. Ben, it is so awesome to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So, Ben, I probably gave a very vague intro of your background and all your amazing experiences. You've been involved in the African ecosystem for a very long time. So I would just like to get started by learning a little bit more about your story and how you started getting involved in the African tech ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's something I wonder myself because it's such an unusual path. I actually grew up mostly across the American South. I mostly identify as an Arkansan, and I thought I would work for the U.S. government. But I graduated with a liberal arts degree in 2009, which was the Great Recession. Not a very good year for a liberal arts degree. And so I kind of looked for work for about a year. I moved to DC, I was living with family, and I just didn't get anything, just nothing at all. And during that year, I had been really interested in microfinance. I had done some study in university in East Africa, specifically in northern Uganda. That was 2006 or 2007. And when I was there, I saw that MTN had this airtime transfer service called MTN Me to You. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. But that was the first time I'd seen that. You know, I didn't come from a prepaid airtime world. And when I saw that, I immediately thought, that's money transfer. And so I started paying attention to that. And then I learned that that wasn't my insight. You know, that just next door in Kenya, Safaricom had been piloting M-Pesa from 2005. And they launched it in 2007. So about the time that they launched M-Pesa, I was next door in Uganda, observing kind of airtime transfer and thinking there's something really cool here. And so while I was looking for work for that year after university, I just kept exploring this and kind of scratching this itch. And I met two guys on Twitter, Tom Bostelman and Dylan Higgins, and we decided to found a company in Kenya that was leveraging, originally the idea was to help microfinance institutions integrate with mobile money to help lower the cost of credit. But what we eventually became was a merchant acquiring company, kind of like Square. And so that company is called Kopo Kopo. That was my first job out of university, and I lived in Kenya for about 5 years. That was 2010 to 2015. And just to kind of wrap it up, once I had seen and kind of lived that experience in Nairobi and you know, we served tens of thousands of merchants. We integrated with about 10 mobile money providers across the continent. We licensed to banks. And so I could just see and feel like how much of an impact you can have when you're addressing real problems. And so once I had that, I just couldn't look away. I feel like I've committed my career to financial services in Africa because it's day zero. You know, there's nothing but opportunity.
Wow, that's amazing. And what happens after, you mentioned you were in Uganda for like 5 years. Like, how did you go from, is it Kopo Kopo? Is that how you call it?
Yeah, that's right.
How did you go from that? I mean, and I saw your background. You've definitely been a founder a few times. You have Hover, you have now Stax, and you have also been a VC at DFS Labs. So just walk us through like that whole journey. Like how did you get involved as a VC, and how did you decide to go back and becoming a founder?
Yeah, so just timeline-wise, Uganda was only about 3 months, and that was while I was in university. And then after university, so I graduate 2009, I moved to Kenya in 2010, and then I'm in Kenya for about 5 years. And while I'm there, that business is called Kopo Kopo. You totally nailed it. It's Kopo, Kopo. And that was like a Square type business. So we were enabling merchants to accept M-Pesa at the point of sale. We were really the first ones pushing a service that today goes by the name Lipa na M-Pesa, so pay with M-Pesa. And during that time, there was a lot of interest from kind of like the Gates Foundation, CGAP at the World Bank. There was a lot of development finance money focused on the space because there wasn't a lot of VC money yet focused on the space. And so I had built some relationships in those networks. We took some non-dilutive funding through those networks. And there was one person who had been working at Gates Foundation that was jumping out to start the DFS lab. And so as I left Copo in 2015, I decided to work with him. His name's Jake Kendall, and then also Stephen Dang. And that was really where they secured, they created the company, they secured the funding. And that was kind of my first step getting into investing. It really, today, like I'm part of DFS Lab, but it's not my full-time or my part-time job. And so mostly here now, I'm just trying to send them great entrepreneurs, good deals, Africa-focused.
Okay, and that makes sense. But at least, and I think it's one of the, like, it's an amazing skill just because I've been there too. Like, I come from a founder's background, have co-founded 2 tech companies, and living from a founder perspective that is raising money from VCs and also understanding to some extent what VCs look for, how to, like what piques your interest. I think that is an interesting process and just journey that if you have the opportunity to do, I would suggest to anybody. It definitely helps in your career. I think one, just like advice out there, being capable of seeing, I would say to some extent, the best of both worlds, founder raising money and also seeing how VC deploy money. Like, what would be your take on that? Or like, how would you advise a founder that is going out there and looking to raise money from VCs?
I think you're exactly right. I wish that I had studied VC more and just like how do venture deals get done? What are the roles in a venture capital institution? I wish I had done that at the very beginning. And I know that at Copo I made mistakes and my founders and I made mistakes because we didn't have that knowledge. And so with DFS Lab, I was able to kind of see this is how some of the thinking works on this side of the table. This is the volume of deals that you're seeing, and you start paying attention to what stands out. Is it what attributes of a founder, what patterns when you're looking at kind of business models or just general go-to-market plans. And so I would advise any entrepreneur to pay attention and study. And I think one book in particular, Venture Deals, is an excellent resource because anytime, think about it like a card game or something. You have multiple people around the table. You have to read the other people at the table or you're not going to play your cards well. And so I think one of the main things I learned was just I need to be able to speak the language so that I appear as one of the venture capital investors that I'm speaking to, and that's just a human thing, like we are tribal, we have kind of our colloquialisms, and the more that you can appear and kind of blend in like a chameleon, the further you'll go. So yeah, study VC if you're pitching VCs.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of the most underrated education out there when it comes to just like the startup journey. It's like, hey, you might have an amazing business, you might have an amazing product, great customers, but if you can't pitch VCs, it can be very hard, like for you to raise that money because it's all about, I think a big amount is storytelling, confidence, conviction. If you can sell the vision and the opportunity, eventually they will believe you. So,
can I expand on something?
Yes.
I think this is worth noting, especially if you've got entrepreneurs in the audience. One thing that shocked me, and this was a TechCrunch article from a couple years ago, and they got this from DocSend data. So, a lot of, me included, a lot of entrepreneurs using DocSend for their pitch decks. And they saw that on average, venture capitalists spend less than 3 minutes on a deck. I think it was like 2 minutes and 44 seconds.
1.5 for me.
Is it? Okay. So that's a huge lesson for the entrepreneur because we're all in on one thing. And like you said, it comes down to storytelling then. So can I grab your attention visually or verbally? And it changes by the person. So you need to have one for each. But can I do that in a couple minutes? And that forces you to distill that message and simplify it as much as you can.
I think like what I've seen, and this is like a hack another founder slash VC to anybody out there. One small hack that I've seen that actually works is when you're sending your deck, right? First, make sure it's super short and straight to the point. But if you can create maybe like a 1 to maybe 3 minute video max where you're like hitting exactly what needs to be hit and then send that alongside your deck, it makes a huge difference because now I think we're people, right? We're interacting with people, we're not interacting with deck or with businesses. For me personally, I think that makes a huge difference when a VC can actually hear you speak and they can hear your voice and how passionate you're about a business. I have actually seen that founders who send videos alongside the deck, even if you can figure out a way to add it in your deck where it's a link where I can click, for me, that goes a long way, especially in the world where we live, where everything is digital. You don't really get the chance. Like most of the African founders that pitch me, for example, are based on the continent. I might not be able to like visit them in person before I ever make an investment. So like having that visual definitely helps. Anyway, not about me today or other founders. Really focus on you, Ben. I think. So you've done Kopo, you've worked a little bit with DFS Labs, you started Hover, at least co-founded, I'm not sure, and then very recently Stax. Tell me a little bit more about what you guys are doing right now and how Stax is doing.
Yeah, so just a quick background. So Hover is the company and Stax is the product. So they're the same thing, but we had started Hover 5 years ago at this point. And we'd started it because we have a technical innovation that's unique to us. And what that is we figured out a way to automate USSD sessions in the background of an Android application. And the reason that matters is that 94% at least of all digital consumer payments in Africa use the USSD rail. And the reason for that, even though there are hundreds of millions of smartphones on the continent, is that people have a strong preference to be offline. So even when I have a smartphone, very commonly across Africa, I'm going to turn off mobile data the moment I leave a Wi-Fi hotspot because I have a prepaid SIM card and all of my apps are going to continue syncing in the background if I don't do that, which depletes my prepaid data balance and costs me real money. And if I'm not doing anything, I hate that. So that's why even with smartphones, across Africa, about 87% of smartphone transactions are using the USSD channel. They're not using internet-based apps like a Chipper Cash or like Barter by Flutterwave or any other internet-dependent app. So we built a technology that allowed us to put an app interface on top of USSD to improve the user experience. And we started the company. Originally, we tried to sell that to other developers for about 3 years until we recognized that the technology worked, but that business model was wrong. And so we decided in 2020 to pivot to Stax because we believe in our technology. And what Stax is kind of a vertical play on top of our core tech, which is that ability to automate USSD in the background of an app. So this is a roundabout way of coming to Stax, which is the full focus today. And Stax is Apple Pay for Africa. So one way to pay with all of your existing bank accounts, with your existing mobile wallets, and soon crypto in a single app that works without using the internet.
Wow, that is amazing and that is powerful. And I can definitely resonate when you were saying that most people don't use data outside of their homes, right? Like if you have access to internet connection in your house, I was just having a similar experience with my mom earlier today where I sent her a WhatsApp message and she doesn't get the message until she's back home later in the evening when she has access to internet in her house because she doesn't want to put, airtime on her phone and then having, that just fades away because it's running on the background. Super, super interesting. And I know I love what you guys are building. You don't hear that a lot. Like most people are always trying to build applications that are dependent on the internet. Yeah. Very few people think of, like what happens when you don't have access to internet, which a good amount of people don't. You mentioned, and I heard your bio earlier, you mentioned something around that when you guys were looking at the problem, you reached to a certain point where it was all about problem solution fit. And I remember mentioning like, okay, this is super interesting. Everybody speaks about product market fit, but I don't think I've heard of a problem solution fit as, as a, I would say slang or, something in the startup ecosystem. So I want to understand what was the thinking behind and what you meant by that.
Yeah, so we talk about, so first of all with Stax, I'll just be upfront, we don't have product market fit today. We will probably in about a month, but we don't today because transactions haven't been very reliable, and that's just been because of some technical bugs. But we've surfaced most of those, we're fixing most of them. This should be behind us soon. And once Stax works the way that we advertise it will, we are certain that we'll have unlocked product market fit. And we know that because of this concept of problem solution fit. And this is not mine, it's not my concept, it's some term of art. But the idea is that you're building something people want. And so how do you go about discovering whether or not you're building something people want? And so we've had a lot of user experience research and kind of design with a capital D that we've put into this. We've found every possible way to look at the data, quantitative, qualitative. And what we know for sure is that people across Africa want a better way to manage their money offline. They really do. So I mentioned before, at least 94% of digital consumer payments in Africa use USSD. And I'm going to ask you this question, but in my 12 years focused on Africa, African fintech, I've never met a single person that likes USSD, not one. And so USSD is not delightful, it's often quite painful, it's really a user hostile technology, but it's essential and people are willing to endure that friction because they have that strong preference to be offline. And so when we go out and we show this is what we're building, these are what the screens are going to look like, but most importantly, this is what it's going to do for you. It's one place where you can manage your bank accounts. It's one place where you can manage your telco wallets. Soon you're going to be able to add crypto. You'll see all of your receipts in a single place. You'll be able to send all of your payments from a single place, and all of that will work without a mobile data connection. Because of this, you'll be able to delete your bank apps. You won't have to have the kludgy Safaricom app anymore that's full of ads, and only works half the time. And so we are really vying to become kind of a money utility that is the primary way that you make all digital payments, which is why I say like Apple Pay for Africa. And when we describe that to our users, everyone wants it. In the last year since we've launched, we've had 250,000 people download and use the service. Now we've churned a great deal of them because we've had bugs that made it not reliable, but that's how we know people want what we're selling. And so that's why we're still driving, even though we don't have product market fit yet, because we know it's just a matter of time.
Got it. That makes sense. And this is a personal question. As I'm thinking about it, I just want to better understand how do you guys make money? Like what is the business model? Either whether there's one right now or more anticipated in the future. What are some of the business model you've thought about?
Yeah, so we are a unique beast. We know how we'll make money. We haven't prioritized monetization yet. We're really focused on getting those transaction success rates up because that unlocks product market fit. But the way that we'll make money is unique because we don't actually touch money. And that makes us completely unique. So think about what Stax is. Stax is an interface that passes instructions to underlying institutions via USSD. We're not actually holding your money. We're not actually processing a payment. And so what that means is we can't just take some basis points from the transactions because we're not part of the money flow. So we have to do something different. And so the model that we've identified looks a little bit like the payment for order flow model from securities trading, where essentially we're just directing purchase traffic to embedded partners in exchange for fees and commissions. So a very specific example in Kenya is, let's say 3 months ago, you used Stax to buy Safaricom airtime. That 3 months ago, that was a direct purchase between you and Safaricom. We made no money. Today, if you do that, you have the same experience, but now instead of us dialing the Safaricom USSD code in the background, we're dialing the code of a partner You don't see that because you're in the interface. We just rerouted the transaction to a partner who then gives us a 5% commission. And then we have the option, we could even give some of that commission back to the user, so you get a little bonus. You're not paying any more to buy airtime via Stax. In fact, you might get a little more. And so today in Kenya, if you buy airtime with Stax, you'll actually get a 5% bonus. So we're just kind of giving that back to users. And that's just airtime, but that description is what we call the monetization motion. And so airtime then is one, like a digital stock keeping unit. Another would be data. Another would be utility payments. And so we'll replicate that motion across a whole suite of digital services. And what's kind of beautiful there is that just in the same way that we don't hold your money and we don't process a payment, in this model, it's almost like an embedded marketplace. We don't have inventory either. We don't have to buy or sell anything. We're just connecting buyers and sellers through software.
And that makes so much sense. And now that you've mentioned the fact that if I understand correctly, and I don't want to I don't want to pitch you your company. I want to know what will be your go-to-market strategy. Like, what are your plans in terms of acquiring? Because Apple Pay means acquiring lots and lots of users, especially if you want to scale. Like, what does that go-to-market look like?
Yeah. Well, first, just to that last point, which is the total addressable market for us is all of it. We want all of the smartphone transactions.
Okay, so that's a big goal.
Yeah, absolutely. But like a universal money utility that's going to work anywhere in Africa for any institution you have. And it's going to give you just a beautiful, unified experience. So how do we get there? We do have a growth team. And kind of today what we're focused on is Kenya, product market fit in Kenya. And so this will be really in stages as we scale in Kenya, and then we scale in our other markets like Nigeria, Ghana, Uganda. But we have your standard kind of paid advertising, so Facebook, Google. We've got a really optimized app store. We've had some support from Google to do that. That actually makes a difference. It's something to pay attention to for any entrepreneur. You can really get a lot of juice out of app store optimization. But then beyond that, we really lean on kind of a longer term strategy that's an SEO strategy, which is called USSD.directory. So it turns out that all across Africa, people are searching for the phrase on the internet, USSD code for X. And no one is bidding for that traffic. And so there's a possibility for us to completely own the long tail of USSD content on the internet and use that as basically the top of the funnel for organic leads. And so the model to look at would be bank.codes, which is from Wise, formerly TransferWise. So if you were to search like, what's my Swift code for HSBC, the top result is going to be a Wise property, and it's going to get you into a Wise funnel. And so our SEO strategy is about owning USSD on the internet in our target markets. So in Ghana or Nigeria today, if you Google USSD, we're going to be a page one result. So that's the SEO strategy, paid, and that's going to be driving organic. Within organic, also there are product-led strategies. So where can we build viral loops into the product itself? For example, payments are inherently social. The receipt is incidental collateral or incidental media. So like I can put promotional material in a receipt. I can look at kind of the old Hotmail strategy where Hotmail used to put PS I love you, sign up for your Hotmail account today. They would just hard code that into a message sent on Hotmail. And so you're receiving a message, but there's also a call to action in that to sign up for the service. So those are kind of product loops. And then the third way that we've looked at is just kind of standard influencers, micro-influencers. And the goal here is that when you have Pan-African ambitions, Africa's not a country. Like there are many Africas, and so there is not one app to rule them all. What you have to be is local in every pocket. And to do that, you have to work through local voices. You need to have local language, local currency support, local anchors for you to go in and out of fiat accounts. And that's where you really want to leverage influencers.
Wow. Well, it seems like you've definitely thought through this process quite a lot, not quite a bit. Another question that I have, which is something that a lot of fintechs, right, fear a lot across the African continent, which is licensing. When again, just doing my research, it seems like like your product will not necessarily need any licenses to be able to operate across Africa. I might be wrong, please correct me. This obviously helps the company scale very rapidly. But what I'm curious is, do you foresee any regulators that may impose, licensing requirement on your technology now or in the future?
Yeah, in the future, of course. You know, yeah, you have to assume that they're coming. And one of our company values is actually plan for contingencies. And so we are assuming that that's coming. But today we've identified a space and an opportunity that is not captured in existing legislation in almost every case across the continent. And so the key to that is that we're not holding money, we're not processing payments. That's the key. So from a fintech perspective, we're usually just completely clear to operate without license or local entities. Increasingly across Africa, we're seeing some GDPR type kind of data protection legislation. And so that's what I'm paying attention to, because I think that's where anyone's going to get got, is in those data regulations. Of course, Nigeria just passed a startup bill. We need to look at that. Generally, we want to engage, we want to contribute to the ecosystem. We are good actors, we're going to act in good faith, but we are also cautious, and we are on our users' side, and we're very clear about that. And so sometimes we might push back a little bit if we don't agree with the way regulatory trends are going. But generally, the view I take is one that's kind of akin to Apple's, which is if you want to win the game at all, you have to play a different game. And one of the ways to win across the patchwork that is Africa, 50 plus countries, hundreds of relevant regulatory bodies, I think the only way to win that game with Pan-African ambitions is to play a different game. And one way to do that is to know as little about your users as possible. And to actually get to a point where you don't know anything personally identifiable about your users, and perhaps even, your own data is encrypted in such a way that you can't recover it. And so this is where Apple kind of takes this view of having what some people call subpoena-proof encryption, because Apple's saying, like, the keys are on the device. I literally can't decrypt this for you. And so I don't know what it is. You can't know what it is, and I'm not going to give it to you. So...
Yeah, I mean, that's really amazing. And Ben, I know you're fundraising. What I'm curious is, how has the fundraising going? You're based in the US. I definitely think you have a leverage compared to the average African founder, that you do have access to US investors. But with the current market, we all know that there has been quite a significant decrease in the amount of funding just being deployed right now. First, how's the fundraising going? And then secondly is, what are just your thoughts on just the impact of the current VC landscape globally?
Yeah. Well, let me state the obvious, or the elephant in the room. I'm also a white guy, so we still capture a disproportionate share of the investment, and it's not for any meritorious reason. It's just because the system is corrupt and needs to change. And so I want to acknowledge that. I've been in kind of fintech for 12 years, but I've always been Africa focused. This has been my whole career. So I do have an increasing network in the United States, but actually a lot of my network is Africa based. And especially from those 5 years in Nairobi, that's really where I built kind of the most density. So I'm still trying. I feel like an outsider, to be honest. When I approach a Silicon Valley investor, I don't talk at the same speed as them. I often have very different values as them. So I feel a bit like an outsider, but I'm still trying to break into that. So it's, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it is certainly easier for me. And then when we look at the trends today, it is getting harder for everyone.
Everybody.
Yeah.
And I always, I like to mention that fundraising first is hard, right? Like
Yes.
it is hard for everybody. Like let's just acknowledge that.
Oh, yeah.
And I have fundraised as, a single black woman, and I fundraised, with, white co-founders. They were both hard. It wasn't easy. It wasn't like, oh, we just walk in a room and they give us money, right? Because we look good. It still requires a significant amount of work. For a lot of founders, it can be a full-time role for a few months.
Must be, I think.
But what I was curious about is how do you think investors are reacting from the fact that you're building an African startup? I think there's still a lot of, and I speak because I have been raising money to, from investors in the US, and there's still a little bit of, I would say, setback where a lot of people don't really understand the African market. Do you feel like that has changed, or do you think it's straightforward where you get in the room and be like, oh, I get it, I like.
Yeah, so ignorance, right? Not seeing the objective opportunity. What is it? By 2015, there will be 2 billion Africans. Like these are the fastest growing populations and GDPs in the world, even in the downturn. So it's ignorance of the opportunity. I have seen change. I'm trying to go back. Like when we were pitching Kopo Kopo in 2011, that's when we started trying to raise VC, and we ultimately landed some VC. But we were educating investors on M-Pesa. And often before we were educating them on M-Pesa, we would have to point out on a map, and I'm not kidding, where's Kenya? And M-Pesa is of Kenya. And today that's no longer the case. And in fact, that's been true for many years at this point. Like I'm thinking over a 12-year experience. I'd say more than 5 years ago, investors started getting really smart. They started seeing the opportunity. And I think the funds, it takes time to raise a fund, and so there's a lag there. And if you look at, is it Maxine Bayan's The Big Deal? He's tracking this, and now it's like $4 billion has gone into African investments just by the end of Q3 this year. So if we look at the numbers, it's absolutely growing. I think there's a lot more work investors could do, especially international investors, to better understand the market, because I think what we saw was a lot of just kind of chasing alpha. Like everything was crowded in the United States, but there was a ton of dry powder, so we're going to look elsewhere, but we don't really have the edge. We don't really know, we don't have the lived experience, we don't really get the market, and so we're going to be more of a herd animal and follow others, and maybe you get a lot of FOMO, and all of a sudden you start getting like the big name kind of tier 1 VC funds start making investments, and then the floodgates open. And honestly, a lot of dumb capital came in, which is fine. That can be fine. I think dumb passive capital is just okay. Dumb active capital is not okay, but dumb passive I'll take every day. And so I think what we're seeing now is we went through a period of exuberance and we've kind of had a crash. And so if you think about like the Gartner hype cycle, I think we're in the trough of disillusionment, but it's going up. The line of best fit is up. Like the future is African. And so what I would encourage investors to do is just get the edge, go get the lived experience, spend time in market, because if they don't, they're leaving money on the table.
Yep, so true. I mean, you couldn't have said it better. So I always love to end these podcasts. Again, the name of the podcast is Live the African Dream. And the idea behind is I think we are all doing our little part, every single one of us, right, to have a better Africa, right? Like whether it being better standard of living, better education, better financial opportunities, right? Better whatever that is. And you're working on a daily basis to make sure that that happens. What would you say is your version of the African dream? Very similar to the American dream. What does that African dream look like?
Yeah. If I can reframe the question a little bit, I can tell you what motivates me and my energies in this mission. And I think about kind of the PayPal mafia, not the people, but the concept. And I see probably the biggest part of my role and what gets me out of bed in the morning is I know the people I work with and what they're capable of. And I want to invest in them, and I want them to have the opportunities to be the investors in the next wave because they have the edge. They know the opportunity, they've lived the opportunity, and they'll capture it with or without me. And so my job is to accelerate them on that path and get them liquidity. And I can do that as a CEO and giving equity ownership to teammates, and then us just focusing, delivering, and exiting, and so like if we do this right, we should create multiple millionaires on this team, if not every member on the team. And that's generational wealth, that's power, that's control. And now I'm gone, because I think I've been doing this for 12 years and I recognize the contradiction of my presence, also. So like the future is African. I'm not African. So it's not my job to dictate or try and drive or shape that future. I think my job is to play more the role of a gardener and just make sure that, the soil in which my teammates grow is nourished and they have everything they need.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, thank you so much, Ben. It was such a pleasure having you, listening to your journey, your involvement on the African continent, as a founder, working in a VC, and really what you guys are doing to make a difference in the financial industry on the continent. Thank you so much for joining us today. For all the listeners, this was Ben Lyon, and I believe you can find him on every social media platform. If you haven't downloaded or don't have Stax yet, I'm sure you could find more information on their website. And until next time, you guys have a good rest of your day. Thank you.